So I'm going to talk about people-centric planning for real. Because a lot of people can talk about, oh, we do people-centric planning, and really what they do is a check-the-box meeting, and they're like, yep, we did it, we reached the people, but we're going to do what we were going to do anyway. So just to get this started, it's a Thursday night, it's kind of gloomy, so we're going to have some fun. So this is going to be audience participation, okay? You guys ready? Can you do it? Yes. That's weak. Can you do it? Thank you. Okay, so if while I'm talking, I say something and you're like, oh my God, that's like fire. I want to hear sss. Can you do that? Let's practice. Sss. All right. If something makes you laugh, I want you to laugh. Let's practice. Great, you guys are good at this. And if something just really speaks to you, I want to clap. Thank you, thank you. All right, my work here is done. Okay. So let's get the party started. So I'm going to give a little bit about me, because every time there's bios and they send things around, they tell you, oh, she went to the University of Maryland, College Park, which is a great institution, by the way. But they don't really tell you who I am and who is talking to you and my biases. So Eric didn't ask me, but my thoughts of Chattanooga. So as I was coming in, I was like, wow, this looks just like Richmond, Virginia. And as we were driving around, I said, wow, this really reminds me of Detroit. And then we went to one neighborhood, and I said, this actually reminds me of my neighborhood in DC. And it was built in the 1920s, and my neighborhood in DC was built in the 1920s. So that's my impression of Chattanooga. I also will say that there are several roads that I would love to get my hands on to make them narrower. There's no reason to have 5-lane roads in some of the places in Chattanooga. Thank you. All right. So let's get the party started. So a little bit about me. I am from the great state of New Jersey. That is where I grew up. This is a picture of Maplewood, New Jersey. So Maplewood, New Jersey is in the northern part of the state, not too far from Newark Airport. I also talk fast because I'm from New Jersey, so if I need to slow down, you can give me a signal. But I talk fast, I walk fast, I do everything fast. But in New Jersey, one of the really great things about my town, it's very people-centric because it was built around horse and buggy. It was a town that was built before we had cars. So if you ever watch like a Lifetime movie and you're like, oh my God, that area is so quaint, that's what Maplewood looks like. I was telling someone earlier, if you Google Maplewood and Time Magazine, so Time Magazine did an article on white-topias, and it was places where white people wanted to live because it was very high income, the public schools were very good, there was transit and all these other great things. And Maplewood would be the perfect white-topia, but for its diversity. So Maplewood is about 35% black. It was, so we were just a very diverse community. And I was saying earlier, I didn't know what white people were until I went to Maryland, because in New Jersey, it's really about your ethnic pride. People would never say I'm white. They'd say I'm Irish, I'm Italian, I'm Jewish. And so as a result, we just had a lot of ethnicity in our shops and all that. So that's where I grew up. This is myself and my business partner, Chauncey Lundy. She's originally from Selma, Alabama. And so we own Inspire Green. We met in 2002 at the conference for the National Society of Black Engineers. And the mission of NSBE is to increase the number of culturally responsible Black engineers who excel academically, succeed professionally, and positively impact the community. And so for us, we're engineers, but we're also about people. And it was, how can we use our engineering degrees to really positively impact the community? So in the first 20 minutes, we're like, oh, we should start a company. I mean, we were like 22 at the time, so it seemed like a really great idea. It's like saying to someone, let's grab coffee. You don't really mean it, but you kind of mean it. And we moved on with life, and then, I worked for the federal government, I worked for private sector, I worked for local government. Right in the middle of the bad economy of 2009, do you guys remember that? Yeah, so we're like, we should quit our good-paying jobs and we should start a company, because that makes sense. And that is what we did. So I left my good-paying job to start a company, and here we are today, 9 years later, still in the fight, still doing really great work, and hiring really great people. And so we do community planning, multimodal transportation planning, and environmental planning. And at this point, we've touched pretty much every major plan in the District of Columbia in some way, some shape, and some form. And at the end of the day, for us, it's always about pushing the government, pushing our clients to do more and to do better for the residents that we serve. Another thing about me is I'm a diver, just because I think it's a fun fact. So I love diving. You should do it. And this is a picture of me as a child, and this represents I am a certified yoga instructor. And I've improved significantly. I can touch my toes now. But this is important because I think people think of yoga as like a class, and you take these classes and you do all these asanas, but it really is more than that. It's a philosophy. And one of the tenets of yoga is ahimsa, and ahimsa means non-harming. It means, am I doing what I can to not harm other living beings? And so for me, it's about how I work with communities. How can I really help this community and not harm? Because sometimes as planners, we have like all these really great ideas. We go to the planning conference and we come back jazzed and we're like, we're gonna do this for the community. And the community's like, that's not what I need. You're not addressing my pain. You're not addressing the trauma that I've dealt with over the past. And so for me, it's really how can I not harm the communities that I'm trying to serve? And so if you've been to any conference or anything in the future, in the last, 5 years, like equity is all the buzz. I'm sure you guys probably have plans where they're like, we need to evaluate equity. And so, here's just to show the difference between equality and equity. So equality is everyone gets the same, equity gets everyone gets what they need, and that's really great. But I'm here to talk about justice. Let's just bring the whole damn fence down. It really is about dismantling some of the things that have happened. And, I would be remiss to not talk about the history of our country. And the reality is our country was built for a certain type of person. And if you look at our governing documents, go look at the original Constitution. Don't look at the amendments. Look at the Bill of Rights. Look at the original Constitution. You had 3/5 of a person. So we built this country on a very particular population. And so as we look at city planning, when a lot of our cities were laid out, it was right in the middle of Jim Crow. And it was right in the middle of all these things that are happening. And we even had the American dream, right? So like I have 2 staff. One is from Colombia and one is from China. And they were like, yes, the American dream. They were telling me about the American dream. And I was like, what is this American dream? And they're like, oh, what we heard in our countries, it's, the white picket fence, 2 kids, a house and a dog and a caravan, right? But when you Google American Dream and ads, one of the things that and this is a real Google screenshot, I did not make this up, but when you Google it, it always shows white families. And that was what the American dream was. And that's how we designed our suburbs, quite frankly, was this white flight that happened to get out of the inner city areas. And even though there is one picture in the middle, which I will show bigger, and that's showing the American dream. Anyone want to tell me what's wrong with this picture? What's going on? Go ahead, shout it out, shout it out. No one? So no one can see the obvious what's happening with this picture. Thank you. So we have this ad in the background of a white family, and it's about the American dream. And then you have black and brown faces waiting in a line. And so this is how we designed our cities. And so as a result, by default, our cities really aren't just. It's really what we're trying to do is go back and right the wrongs of history. And as we're dealing with communities, we really need to honor some of the past of some of that history and honor some of the pain that's still being passed down. One of the interesting things, someone said to me, we're in a post-racial society. I was like, word? Is that so? But my parents, so my dad was born in Georgia. He grew up in North Carolina. And my mom grew up in Louisiana. And so my parents grew up in the deep South, in the middle of Jim Crow in terms of the coming of age. So it's very fresh in their minds, everything that happened pre-civil rights. And so we're really not dealing with some of the trauma that people have, and we're really not honoring some of the history that people have. And so I really want to talk about justice. So there's a woman named Setha Low out of New York City. And so she looks at justice from 3 lenses. There's distributive justice, there's interactional justice, and there's procedural justice. So I'm going to talk about these in the framework of city planning, but she talks about it from the framework of public spaces. And why she comes up is we're working with the University City District in Philadelphia, and we're helping them develop an equity toolkit. because they wanted to get beyond equity. If everyone says equity, and it's like, well, what does it mean? What does it look like? How do we know that we've gotten there? And so we're taking Seth Thelou's framework and we're applying it to public spaces to really say, how do we know that we've gotten to a place that is just? But I'm going to talk about it today from the framework of cities and, most importantly, transportation. So this is from Seth Thelou, and this is her definition of distributive justice. So in terms of public spaces, distributive justice is based on equity, would ensure that public space was available to all people and that everyone would have some degree of access. But as I was making fun of the wide streets in Chattanooga earlier, what we've done with our streets is that we've made them not for people. This is from the District of Columbia. So in the far left is St. Martin's Church, and the priest there actually married me a couple months ago. And then we have houses on the right and houses on the back. In the middle, we have this road. And so I actually was talking to Father Kelly, who's the priest of St. Martin's, and he was saying that the front of St. Martin's used to actually come all the way to about halfway where you see the sunken roadway. And that was the front of St. Martin's Church. And then, of course, at some point in history, like most cities, we cut it right in half by this wide roadway. And so this is the same street. This is North Capitol. There's a garbage can right in the middle of a sidewalk. Does anyone see a problem with that? And so what it's saying is that we've said that we want North Capitol to be for cars. I'm actually working on a needs assessment right now for North Capitol, and I proposed a provocative idea of narrowing the roadway, because that's what I do. I narrow roadways. But it's something that we're trying to do. We're now trying to right the wrongs, and part of the reason why North Capitol looks like that is so that people could get to the suburbs. It was literally cut in half in the 60s so that people could get out to the suburbs. And so now we've left ourselves with a very car-centric street. And just for for those of you that don't know the District of Columbia, this is America's road. It leads to the U.S. Capitol. And this is what we have leading to the U.S. Capitol. There's nothing special about this. The other thing about distributive justice is that, this is a photo from a meeting that we had for inclusive transit. Now, it's one thing, we always say, oh, we should accommodate those with disabilities. And it's one thing to accommodate someone with a disability, and it's another thing to actually design an entire meeting where every single person has a disability. And we pulled it off, and it was everything from, we had to pick the right room. So the thing about this room is you come right off the street into this room. Right on the other side of that door is a bathroom. That's how conscious we had to be about planning this meeting. And as we're thinking about distributive justice, we need to make sure that we're not just thinking about people with disabilities, but we're actually bringing them into the process. Because quite frankly, if people with disabilities are able to move around our city, all of us are able to move around our cities. And this is what lets you know how cities think are important. This is in Cali, Colombia. It's one of my favorite cities, and you should totally visit it. But one of the things that Cali did was they started reclaiming streets for people. And I know there's no people right here, but these are buses, and these are bus-only streets. And I was like floored. I was like, I can't even get a bus lane in DC, let alone barely a bus stop, but this is a bus street. I was like, this is the most amazing thing ever. I'm like taking pictures. I was on vacation, mind you, but I'm like taking pictures because I was like, this is the most amazing thing. And this lets you know what this city values. The city values people and not vehicles. This is a picture of me, a picture that I took in Belgium. Again, I was on vacation. But it was so great was my ability to walk around the street. And cars are allowed to drive on the street. They have to go very slow, but they are allowed on the street. But Brussels has decided streets are for people, and that's how we should move people around. And it was a really great experience, particularly as someone, tourist visiting, to be able to walk and move around a street and not have to worry about a 2,000-ton, 2-ton vehicle hitting me. It was a really great experience, and it really allowed me to be a part of the city and see the city in a different way. And so I'm going to move on to interactional justice. And so interactional justice, based on Seth Thelou, it's really about how comfortable and how welcome do I feel in a space. It's a very interesting time working with Philly around this idea of interactional justice, because if any of you have been and watched the news over the last couple of years, or last couple months rather, you've seen that Philly had a challenge with Starbucks, and two young black men were sitting in Starbucks, and within 2 minutes of them sitting down, the police show up because they were sitting waiting for a friend to have a meeting. But that's not very welcoming, and it's this idea of how do we create cities that are really welcoming for all people? And this is a sign from New Jersey. This is a real sign. And so what we're saying that we just don't want kids in the city. Unattended kids shouldn't be on the sidewalk, but why shouldn't they? I remember as a child, I used to walk to the corner store by myself. I used to play in the middle of the street with my friends. We'd play soccer and flag football. And when a car arrived, we'd yell, "Car!" And everyone stepped to the side. The car would go through. They'd be like, "How y'all doing?" "We good." And that was how life was, but why shouldn't kids be able to walk down a sidewalk? Why aren't kids a part of a city? And why aren't we designing cities for kids? They are residents. They may not pay taxes yet, but they are a part of our city, and they're part of a vibrant city. The other challenge is street harassment. We worked on the district's Vision Zero plan. And for those of you that may not know, Vision Zero is out of Sweden. It's about zero traffic-related deaths and fatalities. And one of the things that we actually included in the district's Vision Zero plan was a whole strategy around street harassment. Because I think that sometimes, thank you. I think that sometimes we can get so myopic in what safety is, and we're so focused on the actual street that we don't think about why people are making the decisions that they're making. And, for any of us who've, I think there was an interesting Facebook post a couple months ago, and it said, "When did you know you were a woman?" And they were asking young ladies this. And almost every young woman said, the first time that someone sexually harassed me on the street. And that's a problem. I mean, people should be able to walk and move on the street and be free, but what's happening is that people are making different decisions. And so as a result of us putting this in the Vision Zero plan for DC, we've actually been able to fund some strategies. So at 14th and U, which is one of our main intersections, we actually had a really cool display on sexual harassment. And as you walk through this display, you would be catcalled. And it was really uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it really helped to open the eyes for people of what it feels for someone to talk about you and invade your person and say really appropriate things about you. So that's one of the things that we did address in the Vision Zero plan, and it is part of making someone feel welcome in a city. And then I'm gonna go here. So this is a picture of Emmett Till. And for those of you that know history and have paid attention to history, Emmett Till was basically murdered. And he had allegedly catcalled a white woman in 1955. And many say that this is the thing that sparked the civil rights movement. And I know you guys are like, "Veronica, that was 1955, it's 2018. We are post-racial." But we're not. And so these are headlines from the last couple of years about biking while black. And it's not that these people weren't doing anything wrong. They were literally just biking. And because maybe they didn't have a helmet, because they were biking in the wrong neighborhood, cops were called on them, and it created this friction. So how do we have a welcoming city if people can't bike on the streets? So we're trying to put in bike lanes. We want people to use the bike lanes, or do we only want some people to use the bike lanes? Because if we only want some people to use the bike lanes, then we should say we only want some people, but we don't, right? We want all people to use the bike lanes. If you follow on Twitter anything that's happening in New York City, there's been a lot of enforcement going around of bike lanes and bikers, and it seems to be it's only pictures with black and brown men. So as we're thinking about creating welcoming cities, we really need to be holistic in that view of what a welcoming city really looks like. And part of the reason this happened right around the time that we were doing the Vision Zero plan is Michael Brown and Ferguson. And I'm sure that if any of you have been remotely watching the news, you saw what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. So there were riots, there were all these things, and there's a lot of people that have a lot of opinions, and that Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, all of that is noise. At the end of the day, the thing that sparked the whole cycle of events was that he was jaywalking. He was walking down his neighborhood street, and that is what started the initial interaction. And this happened right around the time we were doing the DC Vision Zero plan, And even talking the Metropolitan Police Department, which is our local police, they were very involved in us helping craft that plan. And as a result, we actually softened a lot of the enforcement language. And one of the things that the police said is, you're putting us at odds with the community that we are trying to serve. You know, we should be focused on the extremely dangerous behavior like drunk driving and really reckless behavior. But things like jaywalking, hey, if people want to walk in the middle of the street, let them walk in the middle of the street. But why should we have these laws on the books that are directly putting us at odds with our communities? And we're making people feel unwelcome. And it's very hard to be enforcing someone for jaywalking when someone's getting murdered up the street. So what is the priority? And again, it goes back to how we're thinking about justice. If we really want to be just, we can't just write blanket policies. We really have to be thinking about all people. And part of that means we need to engage all people. And so this is a great picture of Chinatown in DC. This is one of my favorite pictures because everyone is just moving in the street. People took over the street. People felt welcome. There were all different types of people. And so we just need to be thinking about that. How do we really create a city where people feel welcome? And then I'll go into procedural justice. And so procedural justice really comes down to the sense of fairness, of who's making the decision, who owns the decision, and why are they making the decision? Because a lot of times people are left out of the process, and I also can say a lot of times cities don't really explain the process to people. You know, we've been in planning and we've done these plans before, but for most people in the community, people are trying to survive. People are just trying to get through the day. People had a bad day at work. They don't have time to read Streets Blog and City Lab about what's in vogue. People are just really trying to survive. And so at the end of the day, we have to make sure that people understand what the process is, and we need to make sure that the process is fair. And so what tends to happen is we have a big public meeting, and we can pick any city USA, we can pick any neighborhood USA, and I'm willing to bet that whoever that city planner is can tell you exactly who's going to show up at the meeting, because we have professional meeting attendees. I know that every city has one. I know that there are parts of the city, depending on where we are, I can tell you exactly who showed up, I can tell you exactly what their comment is, and I don't even have to be at the meeting, right? And that's a problem. So I'm going to walk you through one of my projects, but I need to give you a little bit of context. How many people have ever been to Washington, D.C.? How many people have been to the District of Columbia? How many people know the difference between Washington and the District of Columbia? Okay, like 4 p.m.s. Okay, that's cool, but I get to tell you about my hometown. So a lot of people think about D.C. as Washington, right? So everyone's like, oh, D.C., those people making laws. Like, well, we ain't making no laws. Or, you know, the people in Washington and drain the swamp. That's all we hear. And we're like, that's like 5 buildings. Like there's still the rest of the city where people live and people recreate and work and all those good things. So one thing about the District of Columbia is we are under home rule. We are basically a territory. So there are 7,000 people, residents, who live in the District of Columbia. We have no representation in Congress. That's not true. We have representation in Congress. We have no vote in Congress. So we do have Eleanor Holmes Norton, who is our representative, and she can talk, but she has no vote. We have no senators. We pay taxes. I believe that if you were to look at us compared to any other state, we pay some of the most money to the federal treasury, but yet we have no vote in Congress. The other fun fact about being under home rule is even when we create our own laws, it has to sit in Congress for 45 days before it goes in effect. So what happens is that we vote, our council votes on a law, our mayor signs it, and then it sits in Congress for 45 days. The other fun fact about being under home rule is Congress can make up their own laws on the District of Columbia. As an example, they're going through the budget conversations now for the federal budget, which has nothing to do with us, but if the federal budget isn't balanced and the federal government closes, it shuts down our budget, even though our budget is balanced with our own money because we're just somehow linked to the federal government. Also, fun fact is that when the federal government does their budgets, they can negotiate what they call the DC riders. So Ted Cruz, it failed, fortunately, but Ted Cruz recently just added 2 riders to the Congress's budget affecting the people of the District of Columbia. And one of them was to remove the federal mandate on health care, and the other one was to prevent any local funds for abortion. Regardless of your opinion on those issues, at the end of the day, a senator from Texas has a say on the laws on the District of Columbia. So that's just something that we're constantly challenged with, we're constantly fighting. And it's a very important context because we're planning in a completely different world. Yes, when you have projects, sometimes things have to go to the feds. Pretty much everything we have has to go to the feds. The other thing about the District of Columbia, so in our home rule charter, there were 8 wards that we have. So each ward has a council member. We have 4 at-large council members. We have a council chair. They're all elected and they're all paid positions. We also have a full-time mayor. But in addition, we have these things called advisory neighborhood commissions. So each of these represent a commission. Each commission can be anywhere from 2 to 11 commissioners. And per our home rule charter, they are to have great weight. There have been plenty of court cases around what that means, and no one really knows. And we can't get around it because it's in our charter, and to change the charter, it needs an act of Congress. We are also a changing city. I know people in the back can't read this, so I'll give you the summary. What this is a chart over time of our population starting in 1800 to 2010. So as you can see, our population got as high as about 800,000. We had a dip in population right before the 1968 riots. A lot of that was suburbanization. People were fleeing to Maryland and Virginia in order to have their white picket fence and their 2 kids and their dog. And then we had the 1968 riots, which had the next out-migration of the city. Then we had the crack epidemic, which was the next out-migration of the city. And then as you can see, our population's going up. What's actually missing from this is our population now in 2018, we have about 700,000 residents. We are still growing by 1,000 residents a day. So as fast as we put up a building, it's full. We have people living in 1-bedroom apartments, and there's actually a really fun article, if you actually Google it, it's on Washington Post, where people are taking 1-bedroom apartments and somehow making them 3 bedrooms. They're like building walls in 1-bedroom apartments. That's how we are fighting for space. So we have a lot of people, little itty bitty city. The other thing that's happening is we have these beautiful row homes that you saw in some of the previous pictures. And what people are doing, what developers are doing, is they're purchasing the row homes and they're splitting them into like 3 to 4 units. And so this is causing a really intense thing going on with our parking situation, which I will talk more about, where let's say you had a house with 1 family and 1 car. So now you split it into 4 units, and it may be 4 families and 2 cars. So even though we've doubled the people, or tripled the people, quadrupled the people, we've doubled the amount of cars. So there's now a fight for street space. And we don't have a lot of parking garages. So we are a changing city. And as an example, this is 2 streets. One is from 2017 and one is from 2014. We are literally just building towns. And even since this has been taken, there's now new buildings here. We're building so fast, we're building on air. We are literally building on air in DC. That's where we are. We're building over the highway, several million square feet of new development. If you look at our city, there's nothing but cranes. We have this thing called the waterfront, where it was a fish market, a restaurant, hotels. It is now several million square feet of development. I lived in the Navy Yard for 2 years, which is an area of DC. In the 2 years I lived there, 4 new residential buildings went up. And we're talking like 12-story buildings. And they're all full. So as fast as we put up a building, they're full. Which also, you guys are like, they're kittens. I know. So what's also leading to is we have this kind of racial tension in the city that no one really wants to talk about because we're liberal, we're progressive, yay. We're post-racial. But there is this tension that's happening in a lot of the neighborhoods because we have a lot of new residents who tend to be young and white. They tend to be highly educated. We have neighborhoods that have been largely black for several decades, and they tend to be poor, and people are feeling left behind in the city. And part of the challenge is that there's a real story, and then there's kind of sub-stories. going on. So there are neighborhoods where we've had real gentrification, where low-income people were moved out. I don't know where they went. And we put in luxury apartments. We didn't put back in low-income apartments. That has happened in our city. But also what's happening in our city is it's just a good city to live in. So as fast as you put a house on the market, another one goes for $100,000 more. As an example, I purchased a home in September 2017. We paid $420 for a 1,000-square-foot home. That's a great deal, by the way. Since we've purchased our home, 2 other homes on my block have gone on sale that are smaller than my house, and they're going for $650. I just bought like less than a year ago. That's how fast, and that's how fast our market is growing. It's just the demand for housing because we have people moving in faster than we can put them somewhere. And so it's really just creating this tension. But because we're progressive, we don't talk about the tension. We say things like newcomer, and we say native Washingtonian. And those are all code words so that we don't really have to say what we really mean. It just becomes this constant battle in the city. And it's played out in our mayoral elections, even though all of our mayors have been black. But if people feel like people are kowtowing to one part of the city, they get voted out. It's just that simple. So our last 2 mayors were one-term mayors. Our current mayor is going through re-election, and she's won the primary, and so she will likely win the general because we are a very Democratic-heavy city. We do have a lot of independents, and then our Republicans that we have are actually pretty much Democrats, but they're fiscally conservative Democrats. So we really don't have a whole lot of variation within our city. It's a lot going on. We actually have some Democrats that sound more like Republicans than the Republicans in our city. It's really kind of weird. But this is what we're dealing with. So it's just this constant tension, and it comes out in pretty much every project that I work in. And then we have this thing where we're trying to deal with space. And so this is from one of our projects where we had people design your ideal street, right? And everyone would love this type of a street. There's streetcar, there's, bike lanes, there's cafes. Oh, this is so wonderful. But the cross-section for this street is like 150. I wish I had that much cross-section. Usually I'm dealing with maybe 60 feet if I can get lucky. And most of our streets look like this. This is a picture of Chinatown. And this isn't even rush hour. That's the crazy part. But we are the most congested region. We're number 1, yay. But that's our challenge. So when you try to do a project, everything becomes about traffic. And I'm like, I can't fix your traffic. I can move people. I can't move cars. I don't really know what to tell you. And that's what we're going through right now is this tension between moving people and moving cars. And it's causing us to make some hard choices about how we deal with our city. And then we have this parking issue. I promised I would come back to it. Parking is like the third rail of politics. That's a good way to not get reelected, is to try to take away parking. I have plenty of battle scars for just even trying to take like one foot of parking. And I've even asked people well, what do you want? Do you want parking or do you want a crosswalk? They're like, give me my parking. And it's gotten so bad that, we have people that will write the mayor and say, we need to replace the parking. And it's like, well, where do you want the parking to go? We literally have nowhere to put parking. So it's a thing that I deal with in every project, and I got more about parking. And then next is, this is Pennsylvania Avenue bike lane. So this is one project we were able to get done. It's not protected. Anyone want to know why it's not protected? Anyone have a guess? What? Okay, parking, wrong. Anyone else? Close, but wrong. Anyone else? Space, wrong. So the reason why this isn't protected is in the background, you guys can't quite see it, is the Capitol. And so the Commission for Fine Arts said, you shall not put anything to ruin the view and vista between the Capitol and the White House. And so that's why it's not protected. Although now we have these zebra I don't even know what they're called. They're these zebra humps that people could just drive right over. But this is what we deal with. And this is what I said, our context is very hard, is every time you think you get somewhere, you get stopped and you get roadblocked. But we've had a lot of issues with cars U-turning on our Pennsylvania Avenue bike lanes. And part of it is we really can't protect it properly because of the views and vistas to the U.S. Capitol. And this is a real front cover of the Washington Examiner. So the article says, motorists fuming as bicycles pack the roads. And then we have this guy, he's got the gun, like fire in the background. That's about Libya. That has nothing to do with the bike lanes. So we have this perceived war on cars. There is a war on cars. And this literally goes to Libya. It has absolutely nothing to do with bike lanes. But this is the sensationalism that we're dealing with in our city. And now we get to the fun stuff. So this is my project. So just to orient some of you who may not know, is there a click? Oh, there we go. So this is Union Station. The U.S. Capitol is about right here. And then you can't see them, but they're yellow lines. So this is called the Eastern Downtown Cycle Track Project. And all we were trying to do was just put some bike lanes on a road. And one would think this isn't that hard. However, it is. Because one of the challenges is we have a lot of different stakeholders. So one, we had residents who really wanted to see protected bike lanes. We have churches. There's a bunch of churches all along the 6th Street corridor and then 9th Street. We had one church write a letter saying that we were infringing on their First Amendment right to worship by taking away their parking for a bike lane. I kid you not, you can Google it. And so we have the churches, and church parking is very precious, and people have been doing it, and yet we have to go with the churches. We had bike advocates. We have people who bike in the corridor. And those are two separate groups of people. And I want to make sure that is crystal clear. So the bike advocates, those are the people who join our association, which is the Washington Area Bicycles Association. I'm also the co-founder of Black Women Bike. So those are people who just live and breathe biking, and they fight for it. They show up at community meetings. And largely, with the exception of Black Women Bike, they're largely white and male. So if we have a meeting and they show up, it's largely young white males that show up. But there's also people who bike, and those are a lot of the service workers. They're biking, and they bike off hours, so they don't really get counted because we count bikes like we count cars for whatever strange region, and we only really count them during rush hour. And so what we found is that you have a lot of service workers that are biking off hours, and they're not a part of the bike community. We have a bunch of schools in this area. We have large cultural centers. And when I say large cultural centers, this is the National Mall. So you have museums along here. There's a museum in the center. You have, this is our basketball arena, Capitol Center. It's also, we have a movie theater, a bowling alley. It's like the whole shebang. And then we have up here is our convention center. So we have a lot going on. And the other challenge with this convention center is we are the nation's capital. So anytime there's something like the nuclear summit or any type of summit like that, they shut down everything around the convention center. Anytime the president or the vice president is at the convention center, they shut down everything around the convention center, all the roads and the metro station. And it happens often enough. So these are all the things that we have to contend with. Otherwise, this would be an easy project. So this is our first public meeting. As you can see, it's packed. And this is my face. Look at that. That is a face of just sheer and utter disappointment. So I was getting yelled at by like everyone. So what happened is that people didn't understand the process. And everyone thought we were going to show up after this meeting with bulldozers. But literally where we were in the project was, here are all the possible streets that we could put a bike lane. That was it. We hadn't picked a street. We were really in the beginning of our analysis. We had a couple like pros and cons of each street. We hadn't picked everything. So everyone's showing up, yelling at poor me, because they thought we were showing up within a month on with bulldozers. And we also had this tension of everyone thought we'd already made our decision, which we haven't, and we still have not made a decision, and this was like 3 years ago. So we still haven't decided what street it's gonna go on. It's still not built. But people thought that we had already made a decision. And then adding to this, as I talked about a changing city, this is a rapidly changing area. and we have two very distinct communities in the Shaw neighborhood. We have really low-income housing, which is largely black people. Oh, and guess who owns the housing? The church. And we have a lot of market rate housing. And just for reference, market rate, a one-bedroom apartment in this area is probably $2,000-ish, if not more. And that's market rate. So you have market rate housing, and then you have old black church people, and we had young white cyclists. And then you had the media show up. So then once they showed up, now it's like everyone always feels the need to like play it up for the media. And poor me. But what happened, and let me tell you, this is the first time this ever happened in my career. So now, like when I go to public meetings and people are upset and yelling, I'm like, oh, it's fine. The library police showed up. I didn't even know our library had police, but apparently they do, and they have guns. They showed up and shut our entire meeting down. I was actually internally very thankful. I'd never been so ready for a drink in my life. But they did shut our meeting down because we were just over capacity. So what we ended up having to do was going back out to everyone individually, separating everyone in their corners, having a conversation, talking about the process, talking about where we were, really telling the story of the project. So we had another public meeting. Look at this, way more civilized. So what we did for this public meeting is we had it in an auditorium, so people were stuck in a seat. So it created a sense of decorum. We had a speakers list. People had to sign up to be on the speakers list. We had a moderator, and everyone was given 3 minutes to say whatever they had to say, and we were very fair in the process. So no one got more time than anyone else. Everyone got 3 minutes. Everyone got a chance to talk. We had the entire leadership of the agency in the front. So at the beginning, we had a presentation where we told the story of how we got to where we are and where we are in the process, which is at the very beginning. And everyone had an opportunity to speak, and we were there all day. But everyone had a chance, and so everyone felt like the process was fair. So wrapping up to some questions for you all. So one of the things in terms of justice, distributive justice, it's really about, is there space for everyone? Is there really space for everyone? And is that space fair? And I know that there's like this conversation of what is fair. Well, that's going to depend. But are we giving our streets to cars and that's what we say is okay? Or are we going to give our streets to people? Personally, I believe that they should go to people. And I will always try to shrink a roadway. And that is just what I do. Interactional justice is, do people feel safe and welcome? Are we really thinking about all types of people as we're building our cities? One of the things that we do at Inspire Green is that we always make sure that we get everyone involved in the process, particularly our immigrant communities. We have very distinct pockets of immigrant communities, and they're users of the system. We've even had meetings, projects where we've gotten homeless involved because they are part and users of the system. So it really is about being intentional of getting everyone involved in the process, because you can't know how everyone feels welcomed unless you talk to, everyone.